Hi there, and welcome to the last chapter in our textbook, Chapter 30, Co-Cultural Theory. This is a very interesting theory. It's based on the work of Mark Orb. We talked about him in Muted Group Theory, and you read about him. Basically, this theory is important because it gives agency to those cultural groups which exist as subordinate groups within a dominant culture. And it says that these groups can make decisions as to how they're going to interact and communicate with the dominant group. So this is a little bit different from muted group theory, which focuses on the suppression of the communication of marginalized groups, and instead says that these groups can reach out, because remember, this is a critical theory, and it's a theory that's concerned with culture and diversity. So it says that these groups can take an activist position and take control of their own communication. So let's look at this theory a little more carefully. Again, the first several sentences of Theory at a Glance reiterate what I said. Co-cultural theory provides a framework for understanding how individuals from marginalized groups select strategies for interacting with those from the dominant group. It's grounded in the experience of these persons, and it asserts that co-cultural group members can make decisions about how they'll communicate with members of their culture's dominant group based on their preferred outcomes. In other words, what outcomes do the marginalized group want, and certain types of communication approaches. So that's it in a nutshell. The theory into practice just sort of reiterates that and gives some examples. It talks about how the $64,000 question, the important question that members of the marginalized group will ask themselves is, what communication behavior will lead to the effect that I desire? So what are some of the foundations? Well, just to say it over again, it talks about ways in which individuals can reinforce, manage, alter, and overcome a societal position that puts them outside the center of power. And it also introduces the idea of communication goals, assimilation into the dominant culture, accommodation of the dominant culture, or separation from the dominant culture. And it defines co-cultures as groups of people whose identities are marginalized in the dominant structure. Then it talks a little bit about muted group theory. We've already gone over that. Talks about feminist standpoint theory. Then it talks about phenomenology, which is a qualitative research method which focuses on people's experiences. So the researchers view the situation, the people in the situation that they want to know about, as co-researchers. And the researchers collect descriptions of experiences from co-researchers. They usually use methods like in-depth interviewing, focus groups, and record them. Then they analyze them, looking for repetitions, patterns, and themes. And then they interpret the themes and suggest what overall meanings they have derived from hearing the co-researchers' descriptions. And another feature of that is they usually check the validity of what they've come up with the co-researchers, and will change or modify their findings based on what the co-researchers say. So some of the assumptions are the same as some of our other critical theories, that cultures organized in hierarchies create groups that are favored over others, and power is awarded based on this preference. The experiences of marginalized groups are valuable, and rather than being suppressed, they should be identified and included. Members of underrepresented groups all share an outsider view of the dominant culture. So these are some of the assumptions on which the theory is based. Then, sorry about the teeny tiny print. I wanted to get it on one slide. It talks about the goals. We mentioned those before. The marginalized groups usually have one of three goals. They may want to assimilate. In other words, they want to minimize their cultural differences and become more like the dominant culture. They want to accommodate. They want to change. It's an activist perspective. They want to change the rules of the dominant culture so that their experiences will be included. Or separation. They don't want to assimilate or demand accommodation. There are three approaches. A non-assertive approach, which is non-confrontational. They pay attention to the needs of dominant group members, but they're kind of working behind the scenes. An aggressive approach, these are active behaviors which might be hurtfully expressive to the dominant group. They might try to control the communicative action. Or the assertive approach, where they use self-enhancing expressive communication that also takes into account the needs of others. So on page 488 in your book, there's a matrix and a discussion of these outcomes and approaches and the orientations. And I recommend that you read that, because this is a blueprint to study the activism of marginalized groups, or perhaps for engaging in such activities, either as an advisor or yourself. There's a section on page 491 and through 497, which talks about the strategies and the testing of these orientations. And it's very interesting. I'm not going to try to give you a whole lecture on that. You can read it if this is something that really interests you. As always, then there's a section on 497 and 498, which talks about, other than what we've seen, what are some other factors that influence non-dominant group members' communication choices? They include individuals' life experiences, perceived cost and rewards, the capability of any individual to enact one of these strategies, or the situational context. As always, I urge you to visit the integration and critique section at the end of the chapter, and to see how this theory measures up. What do you think of this theory? Is it something that you might find useful in the future as you pursue communication in the many fields that use communication heavily? I have enjoyed these lectures. They have gone into some, I think, really interesting theories. And I hope that when you take the capstone course 400 or the methods course 310, that you will be able to look back on this course and find some useful things. Thank you for listening. As always, let me know if you have questions.